My name is Miles. I'm 64 years old, and about 3 weeks before my second wedding, I made a decision that most people in my life would have called foolish. I told the woman I was about to marry that I was a retired school custodian living quietly on Social Security and a modest pension. I never mentioned the 14 rental units I owned across Polk County, Florida. I never mentioned the small commercial strip I'd bought with my late wife back in 2003, or the fact that the checking account I described as my rainy day fund had enough in it to make a bank manager sit up straight. I'm glad I kept my mouth shut, because exactly 6 days after we said our vows, she walked into my kitchen with a stack of legal papers and told me she needed me to sign over power of attorney to her daughter. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My wife Dolores passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks, and I'll tell you honestly, I didn't think I would survive it. Not because of the money, not because of the properties, not because I didn't know how to cook or do laundry. I didn't think I would survive it because for 31 years, she was the reason I got out of bed in the morning. She was funny in a way that crept up on you. She had opinions about everything, and she was usually right. When I sat at her bedside in that last week, I made her a promise that I'd be okay. I wasn't sure I meant it, but I kept it anyway. I threw myself into work. Managing the properties took more time than people think. You're always dealing with something, a roof, a tenant dispute, an HVAC unit that decides to quit in August. My friend Otto, who I've known since we were both in our 30s working maintenance for the Lakeland School District, helped me keep busy. He's one of those men who shows up with a casserole and a power drill and doesn't ask if you need help. He just starts. He kept me from sinking in those first 2 years. By year 3, I was okay. Really okay, not just performing okay. I started going back to my church regularly, helping with the Saturday breakfast outreach. That's where I met her. Her name was Greta. 57 years old, she told me. Retired nurse, she said. She had warm eyes and a steady, unhurried way of talking that reminded me a little of Dolores, though I knew better than to chase that similarity too far. She said she was a widow too. Her husband had died of a heart attack about 3 years back, left her to raise her niece Talia mostly on her own. Talia was 19, she said, taking a gap year before community college. Greta's closest friend Willa helped out when she could. We started having coffee after the Saturday breakfast. Then she'd call during the week, just to check in, she said. Small things. She asked about my day. She remembered the names of my tenants when I mentioned them in passings. She asked follow-up questions the next time we talked. She seemed genuinely curious about my life. When she asked what I'd done for work, I told her I'd been in facilities management for the school district for 30 years, which was true. I left out the part about what Dolores and I had built quietly on the side over 3 decades of careful saving and smart buying. Why did I leave it out? Because 2 years after Dolores passed, I'd briefly dated a woman I met through a friend. She was pleasant enough until she found out what I was worth. Then something shifted in her. Every conversation turned toward what we could do, where we could travel, what we could buy. The warmth I'd thought was real started to feel like a thermostat someone else was controlling. I ended things after 8 weeks. It left me cautious in a way I hadn't been before. So when I met Greta, I decided to just be Miles, a retired man with a decent pension and a quiet life. Not a test, exactly, just protection. Before I go any further, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. It means a lot to know who's out there. 6 months of dating. She paid for dinner sometimes. She never asked about my finances. She seemed content with simple things. A walk around Lake Hollingsworth in the evening, cooking together at her apartment on the north side of Lakeland, sitting on the porch watching thunderstorms roll in the way they do in Florida in July. Talia was around occasionally, a quiet girl, a little older seeming than 19, I thought, but I chalked it up to the hard years after her parents' divorce. Willa came to dinner once. She was sharp, watchful. I noticed her eyes moving around my house the one time she visited, cataloging things. I didn't say anything. My son Felix came down from Atlanta in October. He took Greta to dinner, just the 3 of us, and afterward in the driveway he said, "She seems nice, Dad." He paused. "You sure about this?" I told him I was. He nodded once and let it go. Felix isn't someone who pushes. He trusts people to know their own mind. We got married in January. Small ceremony at the church, just family and close friends. Otto was there. Felix flew back down. Greta's sister. She introduced her as a cousin at the ceremony, but I'd heard her call her sis on the phone once, flew in from Georgia. That night, after everyone had gone home and we were in the house I'd lived in for 22 years, Greta looked around the living room and said, "This place is cozy." The way she said it made it sound like something smaller than cozy. 6 days later, I came downstairs on a Tuesday morning to find Greta and Talia already at the kitchen table. Papers spread out, coffee untouched. "Good morning," I said, reaching past them for a mug. "You two are up early." Greta didn't smile. It was the first time since I'd met her that she looked at me without smiling. "Miles, we need to talk about some practical things." I sat down. She pushed a document across the table. It was a power of attorney form, already partially filled out, her name and Talia's name in the designated fields. "What is this?" I asked. "You're 64, she said. "You're not getting younger. It's responsible planning. If anything were to happen to you, someone needs to be able to manage your affairs. I have a will. I have a healthcare directive. My son is my designated." "Your son lives in Atlanta," Talia interrupted. It was the most I'd heard her say in 6 months. "He's not here. We're here." I looked at the papers, looked at Greta. Her face was composed and patient in a way that felt practiced. "I'm not signing this," I said. Greta folded her hands on the table. "Let's also talk about the house. This neighborhood, it's fine, but it's not really suitable for 3 people long term. If we sold this and pooled the proceeds with my savings, we could get something much more appropriate, something in a gated community." "I'm not selling my house." "It's our house now," she said pleasantly. "We're married." Something went cold in my stomach, not panic, clarity. I stood up and said I had some errands to run. I drove to Otto's house without calling first. I sat in his kitchen and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is not his natural tendency. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Miles," he said, "call Felix." Felix picked up on the second ring. When I told him about the papers, the house, Talia sitting there like she'd rehearsed it, there was a silence on his end. Then he said, "Dad, last week I was doing some searching after the wedding. I found something." He read me the headline over the phone. A Gainesville newspaper, 18 months old. A woman named Greta Hollins had been the subject of a civil lawsuit filed by the estate of a deceased man named Raymond Collier, 71. His family alleged she had manipulated him into signing financial documents during the final year of his life. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, terms undisclosed. "There's another one," Felix said. "Different name. Gainesville Ledger, 2019. A woman matching her description, older photo but same woman, I'm almost sure, was named in a complaint filed with the Florida Attorney General's office. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Complaint was dropped when the man refused to testify." My hands were steady when I hung up, but my mind was moving fast. I called Otto back. He knew a woman through his church, a retired law enforcement investigator named Audrey, who now did private investigation work, mostly family law cases. I called her that afternoon. I told her everything and gave her what Felix had found. "Give me a week," she said. I went home. I played the role. I told Greta I'd been thinking about what she said, that maybe she had some good points, that I needed time to get my head around it. She softened immediately. Talia relaxed. They made dinner that night. We watched television. Everything looked completely normal. That week was one of the longest of my life. Audrey called me back in 8 days. "Miles, sit down." Greta's legal name was Margaret Hollins Pruitt. She had used at least 4 different names across Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina over the past 6 years. Talia was not her niece. She was her daughter, 26 years old, not 19, with a 2-year-old fraud conviction from Chatham County, Georgia, that had been pleaded down to misdemeanor theft. Willa was not a friend. She was Greta's younger sister, and she had a civil judgment against her in Savannah for elder financial exploitation. The 3 of them had operated together on at least 5 confirmed cases. 2 of the men had signed over assets before realizing what was happening. One had given Willa access to a joint account within 3 months of meeting her at a community event. One had died before any legal action could be taken. The family suspected Greta had structured the relationship to inherit, but couldn't prove it. Audrey had also spoken off the record to a detective in Gainesville who knew the name Greta Hollins well. He said if you can get them on record making specific financial demands, she told me, and if you can document the misrepresentation about Talia's identity and age, you've got something that can stick. I sat with that for a night. Then I called Audrey back and told her what I wanted to do. I went home the next morning and told Greta I'd been talking to an old friend from the district who worked in finance. I said he'd offered to meet with both of us, go over some options for consolidating my assets in a way that would protect us both. I told her it might be worth cashing in some of what I had if we were serious about buying a new place together. Her eyes did something I'd seen once before, a small involuntary light there and gone. "How much are we talking about?" she asked carefully. "Enough," I said. "I've been conservative my whole life. Maybe it's time I started thinking about enjoying it." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "That's all I ever wanted for you," she said, "for us." We set a meeting at a small conference room in a professional building downtown. Otto played the role of my financial advisor. He'd worn a suit to 3 weddings and 2 funerals in the past decade and owned it with complete authority. The room had a security camera that the building management had agreed to keep running. I had already confirmed with a Florida attorney named Rupert Finch, one of Audrey's contacts who specialized in elder exploitation cases, that recording in a space where I had invited the parties and where I was present as a party to the conversation was permissible as evidence. Greta and Talia arrived together. Willa, I was surprised to see, was with them. Otto shook their hands and explained that he was helping me organize a liquidation of certain assets so that Miles and Greta could purchase property jointly. He mentioned numbers. He floated the idea of a joint account structured as community property. He asked Greta what her financial contribution to the new property purchase would be. She answered without hesitating. She had, she said, approximately $40,000 available, her late husband's life insurance. She looked at me as she said it. Otto nodded. And Miles's contribution, the liquidated assets, we're looking at significantly more than that. In that case, structuring this as truly joint property would require. Talia leaned forward. He's 64. What happens to everything if something happens to him before the property is paid off? We need those protections in place now before any transaction. Which protections specifically? Otto asked. Power of attorney. And the deed on any property they buy should be in my mother's name alone. For simplicity. Otto kept his face neutral. That's an unusual request when both parties are contributing. Miles trusts us, Greta said. She was looking at me. Don't you? It wasn't really a question. I did, I said quietly. I'm not sure I do anymore. The room went still. Willa stood up first. Her voice was sharp. What does that mean? It means I know who you are, I said. All 3 of you. I know Talia isn't your niece. I know about Raymond Collier in Gainesville. I know about the AG complaint from 2019. And I know this room has been recording since you walked in. What happened next was not quiet. Willa knocked her chair back. Talia grabbed her mother's arm. Greta looked at me for a long moment. Not angry, not afraid, just assessing, before her face finally did something real. A kind of collapse, not remorse, exposure. Audrey and Rupert were in the next room. The Lakeland Police Department had 2 officers in the hallway. They were arrested that afternoon. Greta for attempted financial exploitation of an elderly adult, fraud and identity misrepresentation. Talia as a co-conspirator. Willa on a warrant from Chatham County that Audrey had tracked down 3 days earlier, plus the new charges. Felix drove down from Atlanta that night. He sat at my kitchen table and we drank coffee until about 1 in the morning. He kept starting sentences and stopping them. Finally he said, Dad, I'm sorry I didn't push harder when I had the feeling. You told me, I said. You asked if I was sure. I told you I was. You should have been able to be sure. She should have been who she said she was. I didn't have a good answer for that. The case moved through the courts over the next several months. Rupert connected me with 2 of the confirmed prior victims, both men in their late 60s, both of whom had been too ashamed to come forward publicly until now. One had lost a significant portion of his retirement savings Through a joint account Greta had convinced him to open. The other had avoided the worst of it because his daughter had intervened, but he'd still spent nearly 3 years in a legal dispute, untangling what Greta had done to his estate documents. Both of them testified. I testified. Audrey submitted her documented findings. The recordings from the conference room were admitted. Greta received 5 years. Talia received 3 and was ordered to pay restitution. Willa was extradited to Georgia and would face her charges there. After the sentencing, one of the other victims, the man whose daughter had saved him, found me in the courthouse hallway. He was a quiet, careful-looking man, shorter than me, wearing a brown jacket that had been pressed neatly. "I never said anything the first time," he said. "I was embarrassed. Thought people would think I was a fool." "You weren't a fool," I said. "Neither were you." He shook my hand. "Thank you for not being embarrassed." I drove home that evening and sat on my back porch. The Florida evening was doing what Florida evenings do in late spring, warm and soft, the frogs starting up in the drainage pond behind the fence, the sky holding its color for a long time before finally giving up. Dolores would have known what to say. She always could read the exact shape of a moment and say the thing that landed in the middle of it. I missed her in the specific physical way I still miss her sometimes, 4 years on. Not grief exactly, more like a gap in the air where she used to be. I sat there for a while, then I called Felix. He answered on the first ring. "Dad, how are you doing?" "Better than I expected," I said. "It's done. They're convicted." "Good." A pause. "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "You bought 14 properties in this state over 30 years, working a custodian job the whole time, saving every dollar you and Mom could put aside. You built something real together, and you protected it." "Your mother built it," I said. "I just carried the tools." He laughed. It sounded like her the way he laughs. I've told him that before. He doesn't mind. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch a little longer. Somewhere out there, I knew, someone else was probably sitting across from a person who was asking careful questions and watching their eyes for the answer. Someone else was weighing whether to trust, whether to hope. I couldn't protect all of them, but 3 of those people were now out of circulation, and 2 men who'd been too ashamed to speak had spoken, and maybe that would matter to someone down the road. Maybe it would make one person pause. Maybe not. I went inside and locked the back door and turned off the porch light. There's a version of this story where I'm embarrassed by what almost happened to me, embarrassed that I fell for it, that I said vows to someone who was counting my assets before the ink dried. I've turned that feeling over carefully and I've decided not to keep it. Shame is the thing they were counting on. It's what kept the other men quiet. It's the tool they used on us as surely as any legal document. I was lonely. I was hopeful. I was a man who missed his wife and wanted to believe that warmth could be real. None of that makes me a fool. It makes me human. What saved me wasn't cleverness. It was paying attention to what didn't fit, being willing to listen when something felt wrong even before I could name why, and having people around me. Otto Felix, a woman with a license and a sharp eye who had my back when I needed it. Trust yourself. Trust the people who've shown you over years and not weeks who they are. And if something feels off, don't wait to be certain. Certain comes too late. To everyone listening tonight, protect what you've built. Not just the money, the life, the relationships, the version of yourself that you've spent 60-some years becoming. Nobody gets to walk in and take that. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and raised it to the empty kitchen. To Dolores, I said quietly, and to knowing better. Thank you for spending this time with me. I truly value every comment, every city, every person who takes a moment to share where they're listening from. This community means more than I can say. If this story reached someone who needed to hear it, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Walter. I'll be here.